G'day, legends. I hope that you are having a fantastic day. And we do have a legend. We're not in the studio today, but at least virtually online. Mr. History Legends, thank you for coming back.
It's my pleasure. Anytime. It's been a while that we've been trying to make this happen, but today is the day.
Look, it has been a while. Last time we spoke, I was sitting in a red office, and to be honest, there was a little bit of my thinking that thought it might have actually been my last podcast, because I did my interview with you and I was stepping into brain surgery like a few days after, and I was like, well, at least I'll go out with a bang. But we're here and we're back for a second.
And we're back. And we're back.
But there is something that I have to bring up, which was a disagreement between you and I on the last one. And I will say that I've won the argument. It was, will we see, and people bring this up all the time, and I'm like, I'm going to pin him on this.
Ambush.
Ambush. Oh yeah, it's straight up ambush. It's just linear ambush. I've got you here. No, we had just before winter, you and I spoke last, and we had this discussion of, do we think that we'd see a kilometre squares increase or decrease over winter?
What?
A kilometre squares, like as far as ground that Russia or Ukraine had made, will we see a territory change more or less over winter?
Okay.
And that was a slight point of disagreement, but we had seen that then retreat down into the low hundreds instead of the high hundreds that we did see in the months prior, which I think lines up with just the tempo.
What did I say and what did you say when we talked?
So as far as my memory is bringing up to me at the moment, and if I'm incorrect, I have a fantastic excuse with the brain tumor, was that I've got those cards, bro. I'm going to use them. Anyway, was that over winter I said that we would see a decrease in amount of territory made month per month, and there was like a slight bit of disagreement between you and I. But I thought it was a bit.
Well, in that case, you were right.
There is no crystal balls. But mate, look, thank you for coming back on. And look, just a quick rundown. We're going to go over, I guess, the current situation of what is happening, what has happened recently, of course, with everything like Kursk. And I really implore people to go and watch your video on Kursk. I think that was a fantastic breakdown of like step-by-step events. And I'd spoken about it, day by day as things were happening. And even bits in your video, a week or two after that occurring, there was bits that I was learning in it. So credit to you for that video. It's fantastic research in it. But also, there's a lot of talk about the end of the war, and a lot of people talking that the end is near, and that Trump is going to end the war in one way, the other way. And I guess, where do you see that? And that's where we're going to start. Is, do you think that we are close or not to, I guess, the guns falling silent?
Well, knowing my track record with you and how I jinx myself, I'm going to say something and it's going to go the opposite way. No, honestly, just at the moment, as we're speaking right now, disclaimer, I don't see the war ending anytime soon, because there's simply not any incentive for any side to stop. So, and I think the Russians made that clear to Trump. And in my opinion, I think Trump actually thought that the United States, with their might, could actually bring these people to stop the war. A bit like in the Yugoslav wars, where just the fear of a US intervention made everybody shake. But the world has changed. And what worked maybe with smaller nations doesn't work with bigger ones. I think Trump trapped himself. Like, he created his own trap by building this narrative that he could stop the war in 24 hours. Oh, then it's in 3 months. Oh, and then he keeps extending it. And I think that perhaps the Russians are going to allow him to retreat from these positions with, they're going to allow him to retreat from these positions with honor, because there's no way, because 100% the Russians made that clear to their American counterparts, political diplomats, that the war is not ending, and that the war will end when they decide on their terms. So we know, you talk about it all the time, that the Russians have 4 oblasts that they have annexed, and they haven't gained these territories yet. And the most important of those is the Donbass. so Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. The Russians have not yet captured them fully. So if they stop now, the Russian population could outright revolt against the government for starting this war. What was the point of starting this war? Why did so many people lose their life if it's for that potato fields? So yeah, so I think that, and on the Ukrainian side, they're actually reforming their entire military now. They're forming corps. They're reshaping their entire military. This is not a posture that someone would use in time of peace. This is not a sign that, okay, we're going to stop the war. This means we're going to increase, we're going to double down. This is what it means. The Ukrainians said we're going to mobilize even more people. And the people in charge of this reform are some of Ukraine's most extremist elements. Is the Azov units, the National Guard units. So no, I don't think there's any way this war will end anytime soon. I'm not gonna say a date because this guy's gonna ambush me and he's gonna, oh, last time we spoke.
No, look, I do agree with you. And I've actually been saying this. I remember saying this to a friend when I was sitting in Kramatorsk in 2022. I actually said to him, this war is either on the eve of ending or has years to go. And I still think I hold that I think it's just as likely I wake up tomorrow and, hey, look, it's done. There's been something and it's been signed off and done, or we're a long way from it. I don't see a midterm fizzle out somewhere because there's still a lot of gas left in the tank. The problem is with that is in attritional nature. Well, that gas starts then emptying, not at a linear rate. Things can get worse and worse as we go. And something I've been speaking about a lot recently is there has been this idea of the war of attrition is between then a collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces or a collapse of the Russian economy. And I'd like to throw in a third option now, which is then the collapse of Trump's patience. And I think if any one of them is wearing out the fastest, it is that. And I have said that it is, I think, in a lot of Putin's strategy to just push Trump's patience, because Trump has come in with this election goal, this promise to end the war. And of course, that's pushed out into now it was days, then weeks, now months. And, now we're, you and I sitting here thinking we don't know where this is going to be. And lengthening, extending, protracting the war works in Putin's favor. Do you see a position here where it might get to the point where Trump gets to this idea of, look, he's going to present to Putin, you can walk away with these 4 oblasts and Crimea. Do you think that Trump may get backed into having to show real results at one point?
The problem is that it's not Trump to decide what territories Ukraine will hand over to the enemy. This is not. Sorry?
No, sorry, you go.
Oh, I'm saying that, and this is what I'm sure the Ukrainians have told the Americans. They said, your deal is complete BS. Your deal of selling off all the minerals for what help? For the previous crap you have sent us? The US has sent all their leftover surplus from the 1980s and 1990s to the Ukrainians, and really one at a time, not even as a huge pack. And for this help, the Ukrainians have to sell off their entire future? No. Actually, the Ukrainians now, and for some time now, have been preparing to go solo into this war. So they've been starting their own production chains to be fully independent. And they only need the West for very specific high-tech elements, like air defense, for example. But they build their own vehicles now. They have their own MRAPs. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're not as good, but they have their own MRAPs. They build their own drones. They build their own mines, their own mortar shells. There's a lot of things that they do now on their own, and they have adapted to their capabilities. So maybe they have less artillery, but they have more drones. And this is what I've told the Americans. They said, look, if you help us, we have a better chance, but we're going to fight either way. And it's not you that's going to decide what territories we're going to give to the Russians. So he's stuck on this side. And we've seen all the videos of Trump and his team completely humiliating the Ukrainians, but I'm pretty sure the Russians humiliated the Americans too. There's rumors that American diplomats have been waiting for hours, that they've been left waiting, in the hall, just like that. So the Americans are in the middle. And what pisses Trump off is that he doesn't have the power right now. And he doesn't like that.
Yeah.
He's
See,
just a side player. He wanted to be the main player, the main character of the story. He's just been pushed to the side. He doesn't like that.
No, absolutely not. And I think that Putin can use that to his advantage, though, by saying, hey, look, he wants to keep things rolling and, we want to keep things rolling. Okay, we can just play this and protract the war, because protracting the war, from at least my view of it, does play into Putin's hand, because he's domestically supplying. They're not relying on international aid. But my pushback on that would be, yes, it's not, and ethically and morally, I say it's not at all the Americans' land to give up. And the American minerals deal was of a past administration. It's like if I gave you $50 and then in 3 years time, I go, hey mate, about that $50, it's like, well, hang on, plus interest. I agree with that, I guess, ethically, morally, but the point at which I see is the leverage that America can have over Ukraine. Can force it into a position where the war can change incredibly quickly. And you say you think Ukraine is focusing a lot on domestically producing its own systems, and that's what it needs to do. And I think more nations who are sovereign and independent, or at least claim to be in the world, they need to focus on that, as we've seen with American tariffs. But my point, what I would bring up, is that Ukraine, if they lost American support, we know the way the front line is moving at the moment, and the way the war looks like it's going, and that is with the American support. And what I would push back on that is, it doesn't matter if the fight that Ukraine has in them, or their domestic production now. Yes, it's not nothing to take into consideration. But if the US pull out, I don't see how Zelensky could say we are continuing without the Americans, knowing what it looked like, even for a 24-hour ISR reduction. I've heard that there was still a lot feeding through. I don't see, because all I see there is the outcomes are probably going to be potentially a lot worse. And if and when America comes back to the table, Russia may actually have more on the cards. And I'm not saying that I agree with this amount of leverage, but the US has a lot more leverage over Ukraine than it does Russia, especially militarily. And I think there's a lot of focus on hard asset and not soft asset, as far as the detection for missiles, detection for drones, supplying and licensing equipment, even just down to Starlink. Like, if America said, and we know how Elon feels about this war, if America just said Starlink is just kaput, things would turn very quickly, and it would turn from, a lot of the communications are encrypted signal, WhatsApp, Telegram chat. A lot of the drones are running off things. I know there has been movement away, but still, Starlink is one of those things. And it's those assets that concern me, more of that soft than the hard. And then a lot of those that Europe can't backfill, and the change that may have. And as a former soldier, something that is even worrying about that is then, how does that impact the morale and psychology of those at the front line, seeing that America, the largest partner, is now abandoning? How does that feel? Because we know that Ukraine is having a really hard time trying to recruit more personnel, which makes sense, given it's 3 and a bit years into the war, and the front line has been moving in the wrong direction now for some time. And I say, if America were to pull out, and I was a young lad in Kyiv who hadn't signed up yet, I'd be thinking, well, shit, the most powerful country is abandoning us. So I think there's a lot in that. Is there anything in there you'd like to talk to?
I'm thinking, while you were talking, I'm thinking you're right, but we don't know what effect it will have. So from the people on the Ukrainian side I talked to, they hate Trump and they feel betrayed. Is this the legacy that the United States want to continue abandoning their allies continuously? It's been since the Vietnam War. abandoning. So they help their allies until, for internal politics, they abandon them. So there's been South Vietnam. South Vietnam, we can argue, lost the war because the United States abandoned them. They could have held that line for some time. Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, whenever the Americans intervene, we change our mind. Okay, it's over. Now with Ukraine, we're backing you up. Yeah, go fight Russia. Oh, no, we change our mind. What does it say to the, what message does it show to the entire world, especially as the Americans are now? This is the problem I have with this entire situation, is that the Americans want, from my understanding, the Americans want to start the war between Russia and Ukraine so they can focus entirely for the Asia Pacific. However, they also have to show to their allies in the Asia Pacific region that they're a reliable ally. So if they abandon Ukraine, what message does it push to the people of Taiwan? What message to the South Koreans, to the Japanese people? So all these countries, the Philippines, they might say, yeah, you help us now, and when you've had enough, when you've sold us tons of weapons, now you're going to make a deal with our enemy, like you've done so many times. If I were Taiwan now, I wouldn't fight. I'm like, why would I have my entire country destroyed, have hundreds of thousands of men gone, for the end result to be the same? So
it is a big concern of what precedent does this actually set to the partner nations. And as an Australian, I'm like, yeah, the US has a big presence in Australia. We're an important country to them. But what happens if something starts happening here? What we look over and what's happened in Ukraine, America drip feed in support, and this was pre-2022 as well. Rhetoric about joining NATO and all of this, and then it's looking like a complete sort of wipe their hands and that's too hard, then abandoned from that.
Yeah, look, the US is the glue that keeps NATO alive for a multitude of reasons, because it's the biggest military spender, it's the biggest military by a wide margin. So they have the right to lead operations. If the US is gone, who's gonna take the lead in NATO? There's no country that has this edge. So, and European countries have this competition among themselves that they won't allow one of the countries to take the lead. So it's going to be the end of NATO. And there's other alliances like the Five Eyes and all this, but it's all for show. Then it's just a scheme to sell US-made weapons to their allies. Trump has done a lot of damage, and I'm not saying this because I'm hostile to his ideas or whatever. I'm just looking at it from an international perspective. I'm not saying what a domestic policy is doing, what is wrong, not. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of the Ukraine war. Europeans are now turning away from US-made weapons. Australia is turning away from US-made weapons. Everybody, because because Trump talks too much, and that's his problem. He talks too much. He said, yeah, I'm going to make the peace. Okay. That was his selling point, and now it's not happening. Oh, yeah. Oh, the Americans also said, yeah, the weapons we sent you, we can turn them off anytime. This is ridiculous. They also said, yeah, we control how you use it. And that came up with the problems with Greenland, or how he wants to annex Canada as well. Why is he saying all these things? Canadians now, I know it's not the topic, but they're pissed at the United States. And he flamed up nationalism in Canada like nobody else managed to do in Canada in the past 30 years. So people in Denmark are now pissed at the Americans, something that nobody would have imagined. So every country that has now US-made weapons, they're kind of regretting it. So the Americans, the weapons they're making, who are they going to sell them to if they're going to betray all their allies like that? Because this is betrayal. Like, we're talking about a story of betrayal, betraying Ukraine. betraying European countries and Canada by saying, yeah, we're going to take whatever we want. Now understand that the deal that could be done between Russia and Ukraine now is the best deal that Ukraine can have at the moment, because it's going to get only worse. We know this. But this is clearly something that the Ukrainians are ready to accept. So what we have to go back in time a little bit. So when the war started between Russia and Ukraine in 2014, it's been a while. It's not just 2022, it's been 2014. The Russians made a deal, Minsk 1, essentially, okay, the separatist republics just, no, the first deal was just accept the annexation of Crimea. The Ukrainians didn't want. There was Minsk 2, and then it was just, okay, just allow these separatist republics to be independent. No, okay, we're going to continue. And it's incremental with the Russians. They're always going to come back with more terms to the next piece. Now in 2022, it was, okay, now accept Crimea, the separatist republics as independent. This is what you have to do for peace. No. Okay. Then the Russians annexed the entire oblast. They say, okay, now this is the new peace agreement. And if the Ukrainians continue, the Russians are probably going to annex another oblast, and they're going to continue until the Ukrainians give up. So this is the Russian tactic of notice. They're always going to come back with new terms for the peace. So for sure, yes, at the moment it's the best the Ukrainians could do, but they're not ready. The Ukrainians are not ready to give it up. And honestly, whoever signs off this deal for Ukraine is going to be dead within 24 hours. So good luck.
Yeah, and that last bit, I'll touch on that in a few bits in that. That is something that I spoke with someone about, and I've spoken to a lot of people about, is if Zelensky were to sign something like today, I would be leaving the country quickly. But I also raised the concern with, if something is signed and you see a lot of people go, well, this unit is not going to stop fighting, and say peacekeepers come in, what are those peacekeepers willing to enforce? Because if there's something signed and, X unit goes, we're not stopping, which I think a lot of people can sympathize with. This unit, and they've, all their friends have died. They've given massive amounts of sacrifice for years and years, all for America and guys sitting in Kyiv to sign away ground, for them going, well, we're not going to stop. But are the peacekeepers willing to enforce that? Because if you're enforcing peace, you're enforcing it both ways, and you're enforcing it if Ivan from Russia puts a border up a tube, or someone from Ukraine puts a border up a tube. It has to be enforced, and then that's going to get very, very messy, because we know of how these units can work somewhat autonomously away from even the Ministry of Defense, although it might have come under that banner. I think that's going to get messy before it really cleans up. And I just don't see how Europe is going to extend in guarantees, because at the end of the day, they have to have some level of guarantee for Ukraine's security. But if the war is ending, there needs to be a guarantee that this isn't just preparing to have a counter-offensive into Russia or into whatever remains occupied following. Also, it's going to be an absolute mess. And I've seen no one actually put forward something that seems like realistic, that all the partners will actually then agree on, that they're willing to enforce also.
Yeah, it's just stupid. All these plans are stupid, because we've seen all these peace agreements, Minsk 1, Minsk 2. Oh yeah, peace. Okay, we managed to sign a peace deal. Everybody's happy. The next day there's fighting. And then there's fighting ever since. So even if there's a peace agreement, it doesn't mean anything to them, to both sides. This is not how they settle things in this part of the world. They're gonna stop whenever they're just tired. They're very stubborn, Ukrainians and Russians. They're very stubborn. So I don't see them stop just because somebody up there signed a paper. No, they're gonna continue. Both sides have extremist elements that have, in their mind, in their perspective, every incentive to continue. And I think the problem of this, we have to see the Russia-Ukraine war as a civil war. And it's very hard to stop civil wars. because they're so similar one another. And this is why they also now hate each other, because it's when you have one of your best friends, and then you start hating him because he did something to you, and because you were so close to him, it hurts even more. So now you've developed this hatred. And from what I've seen in Ukraine, this is how people feel. Russians also feel hate towards Ukrainians. Both sides have their propaganda ramping up. And of course, there's exaggeration on both sides, but from what I see, there's no way it's going to end now, because the border is also just a line on the front. It's not even it's just across potato fields. It's not even across a river. Like, the only border that is now safe, it's the Dnipro border, because it's a stable front line. And yeah, there've been little pokes across the river, but this is a border between two countries. But fields, it's so easy to continue operations. So there's no terrain feature or regional border that could dictate, okay, now this is the river where the war ends.
Well, that is something that you said last time, as you said, I believe that this war is going to continue up into the Dnipro because it is a physical barrier that, a lot of borders end up getting drawn across, mountains through water until it reaches somewhere, and that it could reach up until there. You speak about the betrayal feeling in both Ukraine and in Europe and other partners from the US. Have you read, there's a 2019 study by RAND called Extending Russia, where in this they talk about then if Ukraine was to get put into NATO, or they talk about joining NATO, that it can basically increase Russian tensions. They could invade and therefore extend Russia and reduce their potential. In this, and it's in like page 30 or 40, they do speak about one of the byproducts of this is the potential for friction within NATO countries. And they talk about there is a real risk that these countries, that Hungary and Germany and America and whoever, see vastly different outcomes. And in it, I wish I could actually quote off the top of my head, but they're like, basically at the expense of Ukraine, we're pushing a goal and a narrative here to extend, but at the same time, we could actually risk our entire alliance also. And I think it's very interesting to see that friction develop inside of NATO between European NATO and American NATO, what holds 80% of the firepower. It's a funny thing to see pop up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a bias that it's the only study that made sense out of all the other ones that didn't make sense and that were just forgotten because of how ridiculous they were, and we just remembered that one. But whoever came up with this, yeah, they've done their job, and maybe they were lucky, who knows? But this is something toward we're heading now. It's also ridiculous on the European side that they're ramping up this idea of war against Russia. It's absolutely dumb. This is not Europe's war either. They can support Ukraine if they want, but this is not Europe's war. They have nothing to gain from this, I feel, because maybe if the Russians invade Finland, if they invade the Baltics, okay, but right now they're already stuck in a war with Ukraine, so the Russians have a lot on their plate, let's say.
The European partners, they would say to that their benefit in this is twofold. Is one, to show that they are upholding then the rules-based order and democracy, and secondly, that they, I guess, and in that first, that they are fighting back against authoritarianism, and secondly, that they are fighting this war because otherwise it's going to cross the borders, and that Putin has goals far beyond Ukraine into their states.
The EU is armed with good intentions. This is the weapons they have. A lot of words and good intentions. That's all the weapons the EU have. And no, I think it's just for show, just for power. Because the EU is not, okay, what people don't understand is that the EU is like an economic alliance, some bureaucracy. It's not a country like the United States. And this is the root of all the problems. There's some people at the head of the EU that have not been elected by anyone. They have been appointed by we don't know who.
Yes.
So that's the problem of the EU. They're making decisions in the name of this economic alliance, but clearly not everybody plays ball. So the entire idea is ridiculous. This is why actually we see the rise of independent countries like France that just come up and say, okay, there's going to be coalitions, the coalition of the willing, but there's no way every European country is going to be involved in this, for the simple reason that European countries have different problems. So the Baltic countries, Scandinavian countries, Russia is their only threat. Their threat is not the same as Spain, which is bordering North Africa, or Greece that has tensions with Turkey that could flare up at any moment. Hungary is in the middle of Europe. They face no external threat. So they don't see the need of all this. So every European country has their own problems. Germany, they're in the middle. They're safe. They have a huge buffer with so many countries. They only want economic output. They don't see the need of having a big army because the other countries around them are financing the armies for Germany. So that's the problem. It's an economic alliance that tries to flex its muscles, but there's so many moving parts. It's not efficient. The United States, however, there's one leader. It's a machine. Russia, it's a machine. China is a machine. Yeah, there's many states and provinces, but there's one leader. It's much more organized. Europe, yeah, okay. That's why they talk a lot, and in the end, they don't do much. And
yeah,
normal that NATO. I remember even the French president before the Ukraine war said NATO was brain dead, because what is NATO's purpose after the fall of the Soviet Union? NATO went to Afghanistan for what? Like, you went there, but okay, it's I think a lot of countries part of NATO regret going to Afghanistan to fight for the Americans, especially now the Danes, the Canadians, they regret. They're like, okay, we lost a lot of personnel for your war, and that's what we get in return.
of course. Yeah, and
And
that's the spit in the face too, though. His countries, like Australia, you know, we lost 40 boys, and then to get tariffed, and it's like, hang on, this was your war. Like, you know, we only went to Afghanistan because you were there. That was our interest. Our interest in going was to tighten relationships with the US. So if we need you further on down the line, and then this has now then occurred. And I think you bring up a really solid point about European, the coalition of the willing, as we have a term in the army, we call it too many chiefs. If you've just got too many people, you never actually get anywhere. And we heard Mrs. Kajakalis, one of my favorite people, talk about this after the Coalition of the Willing meeting, saying basically getting nowhere. And you're not going to if everyone has the same amount of power, but are coming at it with vastly separate ideas. You need sort of one person at the top. And this is why martial law exists. Martial law basically puts a hold on democracy. You become a bit more authoritarian, so you get a vertical structure and you can make shit happen. And America is further, I guess, that way as far as having someone with presidential authority at the top, rather than you've got 27 separate states all doing whatever. And then you see China, which is, you know, way further with, and this is what is occurring, and we're just going on one axis. But we hear from Zelensky to Root to all these leaders who, it's amazing how they can basically repeat the same chorus, but they will say that Russia in the short term will pose a military threat to NATO, to the European NATO states. Now, I've been
Ukraine has every incentive to lie and increase the threat. They have every incentive.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't they play this card?
Oh no, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, do you believe, like many people believe, that Russia does actually pose a military threat to NATO even in the next few years?
The problem is the Russians say the same thing the other way around. The Russians say NATO poses a military threat, but I just don't see today the need for Russia to invade the Baltic countries, for example. I don't see why they would do this. So it's far-fetched for me. So maybe it's going to happen, and you're going to ambush me again in 5 years and say, remember what happened?
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing that it doesn't make sense.
It does. I think it doesn't make sense, and it's more of a politician's thing in Europe to cover up from their own failures in their own countries. You know, I've been to Europe multiple times. I've been to France now in February, and the security question in all these countries, that it's very problematic. People are unhappy with the ruling elite, so the ruling elite have to find something that's gonna pull everyone together against one common enemy. It's not working really well because, well, people don't see it as a threat, you know. So I mean, the only good thing for Europe is that maybe they're gonna move their bums and their butts and get their own industry going, like get their own industry going. So France, UK, Poland, Germany build their own vehicles, build their own aircraft, and that Europe, maybe as an economic structure, could, for example, Poland could buy French weapons, Germany this and that. So they're going to buy each other's weapons, and this is a better type of alliance that is not reliant on the United States. So maybe this is the only positive aspect of this militaristic talk, is that yes, they're going to take their defense into their own hands, which, by the way, Canada has still not started. So yeah, the fact that the Europeans are maybe closest to Russia, yeah, it's not a bad thing, because we don't know what threats Europe could face in the next years, so that they start now. Why not? I just don't see NATO the way it is now to survive anyway, or because people have lost trust. And I think in such an alliance, the most important is trust. You have countries like Turkey that are enemies to Greece. You have Turkey that is now having tensions with Israel. How is the US going to react to that? So for Greece, their enemy is Turkey, for example. At the end of the day, this is their enemy. And for Turkey, same thing. So the way NATO is at the moment, I think it's run its course. The way it is. I don't know. I'm just, maybe I'm pessimistic, but yeah, also the way the lack of industrial output that they've shown, like they wanted to help Ukraine. Oh, we don't have weapons anymore. Wow, really impressive. And this is also another thing that people might want to camouflage in Europe, is that they've spent billions for what then? The military budget of these countries is tens of billions of dollars, and all of a sudden they don't have weapons, they don't have ammo. Where did this money go then? And I think they want to, it's like a smoke screen, you know, they want to prevent people from asking these questions, because how come military forces with so much money cannot repair ships like in the UK? Oh, we don't have enough spare tires, spare this. What? This is your only job.
And even down to mass, like we are out of shells. We're digging into reserves, or we don't have reserves. That I've said multiple times. I say that it is very lucky that this was a localized war between Russia and Ukraine. If this was larger and we're out of shells in 3 or 4 days, that's not great. You'd be in a really bad way really quickly. And I don't care about how good your technology is if you just don't have the basic bits and pieces. F-35s don't win wars. Infantry dudes and guys in tanks, at the end of the day, they're the ones that are winning where the front line actually is. It's supported by these other assets. All these assets support that. It is, and this is the, you know, as a former infantryman, you know, the term people come up with is POGUE, is anyone other than grunt. And what they're basically getting at is the whole military complex is to support my actions, whether it is, and this is, you know, of course I have bias because I'm a former infantryman, and many people say it's actually artillery or tankies or whatever. But let's say those combat corps or RD armor infantry is whether it is a satellite in the sky to a warship to a fighter jet to a long range bomber. it is ultimately from strategic to tactical strikes to support that battlefield movement. And I think we have way too much focus on all these supporting assets that take massive amounts of R&D and huge tech money and have completely forgotten about. Then, yeah, but if we just don't have dudes in the trench, or we just don't have dudes sitting in the cupola of a tank, we just don't have dudes having shells to put up the spout of a gun, ultimately that is the crux of the war when it boils down into after the first weeks and months pass, especially if you step into a protracted conflict with someone like China, all your satellites are probably gone in the first 10 minutes. So what are you then relying on? Are you going to be relying on mass? And Europe has just shown their mass isn't there. And, for North Korea to pump out more shells than Europe, if you want to start comparing GDPs, compare that and have a look at the actual mass. And this is what I say. People say, well, Russia's got the GDP of Italy. Firstly, that's not purchase power parity. But, okay, let's go on that. You go, well, could Italy pump out that many shells? Well, they're not, and they haven't done. And this is where I heard a fantastic term the other day called Schrodinger's Russia, where Russia can be both eliminated and a threat simultaneously. It is if funny one of those things, but I thought of it more as it's more ideological threatening than military at this point in time to Europe.
Absolutely. But now if we can talk about Ukraine more, so the Ukrainians now, so all this is going on from a geopolitical perspective. If the Ukrainians are smart, they're going to try to be as independent as they can from all these countries that flip-flop a lot. So they have no other choice. They're going to build their own weapons as much as they can. I think Poland can send them more tanks, things like that. But there are limitations. And even Ukraine is guilty of not upholding their military industrial output in the years after the fall of the Soviet Union. They've stopped producing their own tanks and weapons. They've sold them to the entire world, but they neglected their own industry, and now they're biting their fingers for their mistake. So a lot of their industrial factories building weapons have been captured in the east of Ukraine too. That's a problem. A lot of factories have been abandoned over time. It's not that easy. At the same time, we've seen how difficult it is to destroy industrial areas that have been built in Soviet times. So even with bombs and missile strikes, these positions hold. So there's an incentive of having factories in all these positions. It's not that easy to destroy. These are made to sustain hits. And for Russia, they're going to continue. I think I'm not going to put a number, but the Russians are going to launch more offensives this summer, more offensive operations. They're going to try to flank the Donbass, so the heart of the Donbass, so Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. They tried going for a frontal assault. It didn't work. So now their entire game plan is to go around it. It's going to take time. When you look at the way the front moves, we're far from World War II type of advances, but also because the number of troops is quite limited on the front. You've seen it yourself. Most attacks consist of what? A squad, a platoon. You cannot go very far with that. It's not as if with the NATO doctrine or Cold War of having entire tank regiments break into enemy lines, and this doesn't work anymore. So it takes more time. The big
that
thing,
maneuver type warfare it's really been challenged by drones, by cheap drones and maneuver warfare. We may have seen the end of at least maneuver warfare, large armored maneuver warfare without extreme cost, unless your enemy is completely attrited by the time you can actually maneuver in the position.
Well, that's the thing. It's because the armored vehicles that currently exist are too expensive. And that's the problem of NATO. NATO has these very expensive tanks, and we've seen them being taken down by mere drones. So the entire industrial military complex is now in deep trouble because they make money out of these high-tech weapons that cost millions of dollars a piece. But we've seen that to win a war, you need equipment that can be lost. You prefer to have 100 tanks that are average, but that can cover a wide range that can be lost and repaired easily than to have 10 elite tanks. And we've seen that with the M1A1 Abrams. I know they're not the most modern ones, but they were sold as one of the best tanks for Ukraine. And, well, they're just as good as any other Soviet era tank.
And this is something that you're preaching to the choir of directly on that same route, that if you wanted to help Ukraine, don't try and improve optics by sending 40 American vehicles or Leopard 2. No. If you really want to help Ukraine, that money that you're going to spend on those Abrams to send there, because this was when Australia was considering sending
I remember
the money that we spent on the Abrams and the bloody airlift in C-17s to get them there. Take that money, go to a country that operate T-series Soviet vehicles that Ukraine already operate. They've got crews on. They need parts for all of this. Buy them there, regardless of what you pay. You're not going to be paying the replacement cost of an M1, and send that across, because that mass. And well, the key to winning attritional protracted warfare is having the best low army that you can. You need high army elements, better trained elements, better vehicles and weapons to go front to front to basically have short attacks to stop breakthroughs or to achieve break-ins. Then you need the best quality low-end army possible, and that is just what we do not have. I spoke recently at a conference, and I basically said to this room, if we lost 1,000 men a day, how long could we fight for as a military? Think about this yourselves. And people are like, a couple of days. And that's a huge concern. And I even go down to I think the basic infantrymen in at least Australia, and my boys can hate me for saying this, but I think they're too highly trained because they're too hard to replace. That if one NCO from my old unit, if he gets taken out, you've lost 6 years of training. Now, of course, elements like this are needed, to go frontline to frontline maneuver operations. But we also need a low end that, and I hate saying this because people know, of course, I have a lot of, I hate seeing people killed in war. But we also, if you step into a protracted war like this, you need replaceable people too, and you need to be able to bring them to a standard in vehicles that they can operate that are simple enough, or other systems, to be able to have quick replacement on the front. And the NATO militaries are just not set up for this at all.
It's funny because with friends we're just shit talking, and at one point we're figuring out that maybe what makes the strength of the Russian army is that they still have a lot of people living in rural areas. And we've seen that throughout history, a lot of the armies that perform very well are the ones that have a lot of boys from the countryside, the rural areas, not the city boys. Because we've seen in Ukraine, it's not the city boys that are fighting. It's not the people from Kiev or Moscow. It's the people from random small towns. Even Napoleon said he's very proud of having a huge army of peasants because they don't complain, they listen to orders, and they're very strong, so resilient. They don't care about being in trenches. This is what we forget, but during World War I, most people didn't feel the same anxiety of the trenches as we do today, thinking back of the war. Because these people lived in houses that were very rudimentary back in the days. So living outside, it happens that you sleep outside. I've seen records, memoirs of World War I soldiers, and all they asked was dry hay. If they had dry hay, they were happy. And they were provided with that hay, and they fought on. It's just that today we cannot imagine fighting in such conditions because of all the comfort we have. I'm bringing this up because of the war of attrition. I've studied losses during the Battle of Kursk. I spent way too much time. I think I'm on the spectrum for doing this because there's no way somebody else would do this. But I found the root of the website Mediazona. The Mediazona that talks about Russian losses. I've seen how, and now I understand their agenda of how they can lie. They lie by omission and they lie by not doing their job properly. But I've seen the website that shows every single listing of Russian soldier that fell, and it's essentially people in Russia have internet, and they're also human beings, unlike what people think. So they're going to make a post and a memorial for the relatives that fell in the war. So there's thousands of posts, and when you see the face of the people, when you see where they come from, it's people from rural areas that they have no job really. It's the kind of guy we all know that's is in his mid-30s, early 40s, and he still doesn't have his life figured out. So this is the prime target for the Russian army, saying, redeem yourself to your family, redeem yourself to your country, and with a subtitle, be useful. So be a hero, the hero that you've never managed to be in your civilian life. This is the people they want to attract into the military. And as long as they can attract these type of people, the Russian army will have soldiers. From stories I've heard, the only complaint is that all of a sudden there's less people operating tractors to take out the snow in rural areas. You know, it's people working in the field that are missing. Garbage collectors are missing now. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, there was a little bug, but so it's these type of people that are recruited into the army. So you see the type of jobs, either they don't have a job or they don't have 9-to-5s. They don't like waking up early to go to a job. This is the type of people that Russia is hiring. The problem is it might happen that these people are going to run out, because you only have so many people living aside of your society. So this is the problem for Russia in terms of recruitment. And for Ukraine, and this is the Russian tactic too, of offering big amount of money works for a certain class of people. But once again, the urban people, the urbanoids, are not gonna fall for this. They say, okay, my life is more worth than this amount of money. For Ukraine, the problem is corruption. So they have a huge pool of manpower left. I've read an article, they said, yeah, we have 6 to 7 million men that could still be mobilized, but they can't find them. So for Ukraine, it's a different type of problem. But in both cases, it's it's not the urban people that are running into the offices. It's mostly rural area men. And this is also what we see in most NATO armies. In England, it's the same thing. In England, it's the people from the northern countryside of England, like where there's no big cities. Those are the people that enlist in the military. And I'm pretty sure it's in Australia, it's the same thing. It's people from...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not the guys from downtown Sydney that are going to enlist in the military.
Oh, you can't join. No one I knew was like inner city Melbourne because you couldn't have blue hair. But like you touched on a very, very good point that, you know, it is those guys. And even I was thinking the Australian Defence Force ads, like our ads on TV recruiting, it's aimed at that too. You know, you'll have, you know, it's wow. It depends at the time. And now that we are, you know, stepping into time of war, we've gone away from the two mums and their child sort of Defence Force ad to average.
Canada's still into it. Canada's still into it, but yeah.
But yeah, but you know, it's you know, pointing at, hey, make something better of yourself. You know, rise above. That's the most famous Australian recruiting ad. Was incredibly cringe. But yeah, you're targeting sort of those more rural types. And you're correct, like in World War I, that's why, you know, Australia always really was punching above their weight in wars. Was, well, you had an island full of conscripts at one point. We weren't very far beyond that. And you had a heap of dudes living out on the farms who were given an opportunity to go somewhere. And we see that through a lot of different campaigns. But of course, there should be some concern when we talk about that and having the best quality low-end army with the fear of China and protracted war there, because we hear about these numbers that Russia or Ukraine may have and living in hardship in rural areas. And then we look at a country like China, you know, 1.4 billion people, and there should be concern there. And I want to link that into, do you think that a lot of Trump's decisions are being made due to the threat of Russia moving closer to China and some of the problems that that then solves?
Absolutely. I think that's the main strategy. You know, they're doing the reverse strategy of what they did during the Cold War. So during the Cold War, the Americans approached China in the 1970s to get them away from Russia. And it worked. But also because there were already tensions between the Communist Party of China and the one in Russia. So there was already some ideological shift, and there were wars between different communist countries during that time. Just like when communist Vietnam invaded communist Cambodia.
Yeah.
And
we greatly underestimate those relationships. Everyone, this axis of upheaval between Iran and Russia and China, I think, and North Korea is greatly overestimated, because you look and you have the actual routes, the roots don't go that deep on these relationships. When China and Russia were both communists, they couldn't work this shit out between each other.
Yeah, because they have different goals, but we see the same with NATO. Every country has their own self-interest at heart. And so yeah, with China now, the Russia, my God, I can't speak. It's too early in the morning. You brought me here at 8 in the morning.
Hey, I can't help living on the other side of the world.
Yeah, but Trump now wants to bring Russia away from China, because if there's a war with China, the worst case for the Americans would be that Russia now sends entire trains full of ammunition to the Chinese, entire trucks full of tanks and equipment. At the same time, the Chinese haven't done that to Russia. The Chinese haven't sent entire trucks full of weapons to the Russians either. So this is why there is an opening, because even from the Russian perspective, the Chinese have been a very shy ally.
Absolutely. They've been very passive. Like, I know, Zelensky and others will love to show 1 or 2 or 3 maybe Chinese soldiers. Oh, look, if you've got 1.4 billion people and 2 or 3 make their way over there, I wouldn't say it's systemic recruitment of Chinese nationals, as well as if you have a couple of golf buggies rock up on the front line, that if this claim that if China stepped into this, we wouldn't be seeing 1 or 2 golf buggies, we'd be seeing unlimited amounts, realistically, for the size of war, of armor and arty and shells and whatever, just due to that sheer industrial output.
Yeah.
I think there's a concern around some key problems China has, and that if you overlay Russia's problems and China's problems in a larger war, it tends, if you to combine them, to actually really backfill a lot of these, such as, China's access to naval ports where they can get blockaded. And then you overlay, well, if they had access to Russian ports, well, that increases their lethality a lot, as well as key bits of technology, or very basic. So there's some areas, of course, where Russia is, we believe, more advanced than China, such as nuclear propulsion or submarine, anti-submarine warfare, and a lot of areas where China, we believe, potentially is ahead of the US, but definitely ahead of Russia in things like chips and AI and some of those, as well as just food, that if they stepped into a protracted war, the ability to still feed a Chinese population from Russia too. And I think that you and I are in agreement that Trump is seeing this and going, there's a fight for global hegemony. We are in, some would claim, heading towards multipolar world. Some would say that we are currently in this as far as spheres of influence. And the only way to draw China away is by having some level of tariff war, and then the partner with them of Russia to try and maybe betray other nations to draw them away. And I think a lot of people, to push back on what you said about, I guess, Trump betraying here, is, did he have another choice rather than to sink into a second place or equal first place with China? What other decisions, I guess, were actually on the table for him?
It's not just that. I think it's the combination of the fact that he was ready to abandon Ukraine, which a lot of Americans are okay with, because they have always had this isolationist mindset. This is the American way of being, And I think the root cause also is because Americans have no neighbors in their close proximity, so they don't understand diplomacy. They have Canada up top, then they have Mexico at the bottom, but most Americans don't know. Many Americans have never been to a foreign country. They don't know how to behave with diplomacy. So Americans are always very cowboyish, you know. But Trump's plan would have been good had he kept NATO alliance intact. You know, with the tariffs, he shot himself in the foot by making all his allies that could have helped him in this war against China now rethink twice. Do you think Denmark is now going to send troops to defend US interests in the Pacific? Never. France? Nope. Britain? Doubt. So the US might be alone in this war against China. And he created the problem himself. Even Canada was ready doing patrols in the Pacific. And now the US is talking about, oh no, we're going to annex. We're going to annex Canada. But this is exactly what China is doing to Taiwan as well. So everybody's annexing each other. Maybe that's his plan is not even China. Maybe his plan is just to annex North America and be an island, a continental power like this.
Yeah, this does go into a concern that Henry Kissinger raises in, I believe, World Order, about that NATO for European states is a free admission ticket or a very cheap admission ticket to America's defense and the nuclear umbrella, where NATO for America is an ability to have an arm of influence and power into Eurasia, because otherwise America is threatened at being basically a cut-off island floating in North America. And the possibility then becomes, if there's not that arm of nuclear umbrella and influence into Europe and Eurasia, that then those states could end up becoming a arm of influence from a large Asian power. And that this is where I push back on this idea that NATO is a defensive alliance. I say I believe it is for the European NATO countries. It's not for America. For America, it is an alliance of influence and interest into this area of the world. But without it, America could lose that. And the other problem is, in this day and age, states need to be part of some level of coalition, and we could see relationships then moving further eastward. There's definitely
check this out. You know, even with Australia, there's a problem. The Australians canceled the deal with France for these submarines, okay? And then they turned to the US. Okay, the traditional alliance between Australia and the United States is known. But now comes a problem. First of all, the delivery of these submarines is going to take a decade before they arrive.
That's for like the first one. Yeah, it's a 50-year project. They're built down the road for me. But yeah.
Okay, so the first one in 10 years, when the Chinese are already knocking on the door of Australia now. Australia needs stuff now. So, and the worst thing is, even if the Australians were now starting to get all these submarines, by the time they train and all this, it's going to take even more time to really master these things. Okay, so that's the technical aspect. But imagine the US end up making a deal with China, and it prevents Australians from using US military equipment against China. Look, if the Americans were the arch nemesis of Russia 1 year ago, and now they're best friends, imagine there's a new government in the United States, pro-China, say, okay, no, we're not going to defend Australia. You better not use our weapons against the Chinese. What do you do then? So there's a real problem now about such problems. So yeah, Australians should really think of modern ways of defending their territory that involve low-tech components that they can master themselves, just like Ukraine is doing right now. And Ukraine understood this before anyone else, that, oh, you can have very cheap drones, naval drones. You know, Australia has a very large coastline. You can hide so many naval drones. So this is a very good asset to have. They're very cheap and they can inflict a lot of damage. So no, the Ukrainians have done, like, you know, you and I we talk about Russian gains, and we're often blamed for mentioning these gains, but it's a fact on the ground. You know, we're just reporting what's happening without cope, unlike some other people. But at the same time, the Ukrainians are still doing a good job with the few cards they have available. So yeah, they have drones and stuff. There's some things that Ukraine is doing well. So in that aspect, the tech aspect, they managed to do this relatively well. But the Ukrainians also sabotaged themselves with the entire corruption and the poor treatment of their soldiers, and how they love to shoot themselves in the foot. So they could have a very strong military, but some people put their self-interest first, and it ruins the entire process. So Ukraine still have major problems in the war. But yeah, all this to say that I don't see how the United States are going to bring back their allies into a war with China.
Well, the biggest thing that I think is going to be a byproduct of what has occurred over the past few weeks with America is that we're going to see the nuclear non-proliferation just thrown out the window as far as deterrence, because they're going to go, well, look, the deterrence that is the best deterrence we can have is being sovereign, independent, and have the ultimate weapon system sitting there. And I think that we will see other nations who went, look, we were happy not developing and having nuclear weapons because we thought that you were with us no matter what, and that the deterrence for Australia, our nuclear deterrence, was yours. And if that is, you know, questioned at all, we're going to see a lot of countries go, well, actually, no, we want our own weapon systems. And it's not going to sit in these several nations that do. I think we'll see a lot of nations build those systems, and we'll see that thrown out the window. And people always bring up, and I push back on this, but I understand the fundamental, but they get key elements incorrect, of if Ukraine still had nuclear weapons, therefore Russia would not have invaded. Now, firstly, the fact of the matter, the objective fact is they were not Ukrainian nuclear weapons or be able to be operated by Ukraine. That needs to be, it wasn't that America came in and stole them and had, no, you couldn't launch them or maintain them. And by now they'd actually be out of date for that type. But I understand this premise of, yeah, if Ukraine was a nuclear armed state, there'd be a hell of a lot more strategic sympathy and tactical consideration made before you cross the border into a state that can have that. We have not seen a great state war between nuclear armed powers, other than somewhat proxy. And I think a lot of countries will look into this as an option. And I said this, if I was tomorrow, next week we vote as the Australian Prime Minister, and if I won, I'd be saying, look, let's leave the Commonwealth. We need to be sovereign and independent, make decisions completely for ourselves. And I want to be a nuclear armed state. Because I want that deterrence more so than a signature on a bit of a paper between other countries. And this comes back to, I know Mr. Kissinger raises this and a lot of others have, of realistically, if a bomb lands somewhere, will America come to the aid? Is America going to, if Australia gets invaded or China drops a bomb in Australia, is America going to sacrifice their homeland for us? And a lot of people may answer no to that. And I guess this is a thought process you can do at home, and I hope that we never face that. But that ultimate deterrence, and I think we'll see a lot of states, including, I believe, Ukraine, once things fall silent, go, look, a lot of countries were not there for us like we thought they would be. We want to look into this option as far as ultimate deterrence. And I think that's going to be a byproduct of this is distrust in that American system. Therefore, we want to be as heavily armed as possible by our own systems.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I've read that somewhere, but in the 1990s, when Ukraine, I think that's when they gave up their nuclear weapons. I think the Americans also made this deal because, okay, maybe they thought the Ukrainians would sell the weapons, you know, because for cash, could have sold the weapons to some Middle Eastern country with cash. So they couldn't operate them, but they could have sold them. So they're like, okay, we're not going to give such weapons to a country that is known to be very corrupt. So let's just make a deal to remove these weapons from this country.
Absolutely.
So that's what there was one thing I thought about. Yeah, but you're right. Nuclear proliferation could be a big problem in the coming years because of all this. Yeah, it could be.
On the
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
Given the battlefield situation, what do you think is going to be the most likely or the best possible option for Ukraine at this point in time? Or do you think that it is slowly just going to get worse and worse as this carries on with the attrition?
Look, from my understanding, the Ukrainians now they're on the defensive. So they're not planning an offensive for 2025. They launched the offensive in Kursk. So 2023, they launched an offensive. 2024, they launched an offensive. Are they going to be dumb enough to launch another offensive? From their perspective, I hope not. I think a lot of their elements, there's a power struggle in the Ukrainian army that is probably taking place that we're not aware of. And at first you had the NATO guys, the pro-NATO guys, like Zaluzhny and all these guys, pushed to the side. And the ones that were very close to the West. And this grouping lost influence because it doesn't work. Think about it. A lot of the offensives that Ukraine has launched there were PR stunts to convince the West to keep helping them, to convince the United States to keep helping them. But now they see that everybody, despite all their efforts, is thinking twice about helping them. Their biggest allies now outright considering to abandon them to the enemy. So the party in Ukraine that was the closest to the West probably lost influence compared to the ones that are nationalist, compared to Azov, compared to people that are more open to a protracted war. So the Azov guys are now reforming the Ukrainian army. They're building the first Azov Corps. There's the third Azov Corps that might come very soon. There's the second Corps of the National Guard. These are ideologically motivated units. And they say, okay, we tried your tactic of pleasing the West. We're actually going to focus on the battlefield. So they're going to keep defending, launch small counterattacks, and try to prevent casualties in the ranks while they mobilize and fill in the ranks. So from their perspective, Ukraine is just to tire out Russia. This is the Ukrainian strategy right now. Retreat, give up land in the east, which to them is already lost in a way. The eastern Ukraine to them perhaps is already gone. The Donbass probably in their mind is already gone, but they're going to make the Russians pay the highest of price to get it.
And do you think this rate of attrition is in Ukraine's favor?
No. But look, it's a good question. We could have started with this. But by looking at the casualty websites for the Russians and the Ukrainians, what struck me is that we stand about 90,000 confirmed Russian losses, because Mediazona counts a lot of double soldiers 2 times, sometimes 3 times. So let's say 90,000. Plus the people from the Donbass that nobody talks about, which is the biggest secret in the war. Let's say another 20,000. So the Russians could be over 110,000 fatalities. But the Ukrainians on the website that counts Ukrainian losses, that has less means to count, they have less people doing the work, we stand at about 75, 80,000 KIA, and about the same number in missing. So you see about the ratio of losses, it's 1.5. This is what we see right now. Could be higher because a lot of Ukraine soldiers are gone missing. A lot of Ukraine soldiers have gone missing. But this is the ratio of losses. Then in terms of equipment, Russia has much more flexibility and shells. The Russians they have a bigger population. They can easily continue this war. Of course, for Ukraine, it's more problematic. And what makes this even more problematic is that in both countries, the birth rate was already low since the fall of the Soviet Union. So what makes it very hard is that a lot of families only have one child, two children at most. And some families, if they lost one son, it's the end of their family. So this is what makes it hard for both countries to draft a younger population, because they're already facing these demographic problems. Now the war just aggravates them. But the problem is for the Ukrainians now, for a lot of them, even though they see this, they're like, we're just going to go down. We're just going to go down and bring as many of the enemies as we can. Is it logical? Maybe not. I'm not saying this is the best case scenario for everyone, but I'm saying this is how they think. These guys have tried every option. Okay, maneuver warfare, this, that, doesn't work. Oh, the West is going to help us. No, actually, the West is going to ditch you guys. So they're going to go all in. Full defense. If the Ukrainians go full defensive, it's also going to be very hard for the Russians. The Russians will have to ramp up, get more troops all the time too. This is also not the best case scenario for Russia. But the West cannot do anything. Like you said, the peacekeepers. You would need so many peacekeepers to hold the line. Tens of thousands. And even then, we've seen peacekeepers, how useful they've been in Lebanon, how useful they've been in the Congo. I don't see France deploy 50,000 troops and what? They're going to get caught in the crossfire. They're going to lose a bunch of guys and they're going to return home. Nah. So yeah, I think the war is going to continue. We're in the middle of it. I know and people are tired of it, but
and like all protracted war and attritional war, it gets more and more brutal as it goes on. The more rules get thrown out the window.
Yeah, a lot of now also for Ukraine. What's interesting is that I've seen a video of a mobilized soldier from late 2022 or early 2023 that has been raised to company commander, and that's also something we forget, is that although mobilized manpower, although the mobilized troops suffer very high casualties because they're literally sacrificed by their commanders, or they were up until recently sacrificed to hold useless positions, the ones that survive do become experienced combatants. So that's something we also cannot forget. So Ukraine still has a pool of troops that now survived very difficult battles. The problem for Ukraine is, can they convince the rest of the population to fight into this war? All the men that are hiding. This is the biggest. If Ukraine can convince its own population to join the war effort, and that it's a total war, and that tomorrow they have 1 million men signing up into the military, it's going to be very hard for Russia. What do you think? If tomorrow Ukraine can manage to convince, and they have 1 million extra manpower.
Oh, I'm not saying it wouldn't be, but I just think it's so far out of what I see occurring.
100%.
The Ukraine to improve its recruitment, and because what I talk about this a lot as a former infantryman, I say, well, look, it's all well and good physically pulling someone off the street into a van and chucking them onto the front line, but they're not really willing to fight. And what you really want to be effective at the front line is someone who believes in the cause, who believes in laying his life down, who's recruited in, he's motivated, and he goes there to fight. They are far more useful on the front line. There's a lot of discussions around World War I of this, of guys saying, we don't want conscripts on the front line. They don't want to be here. And yes, if Ukraine could get 1 million men and arm them and give them some level of training, yeah, of course it's going to make a difference. But at the same time, I say, look, the other day they were bragging about that new recruitment between 18 and 25 for recruiting 500 guys. There was a bragging point of that. And I brought up that this is a concern, because if you put 500 people in a room, it's large. Yes, you spread them over 1,100 kilometers front line, it's not very large.
Absolutely.
And you need to be recruiting when Russia's recruiting 1,000 guys a day. This is a concerning figure. And yes, of course, it would make a huge difference and increase that cost. But and I know I'm not Ukrainian, so it's not my decision to make. But it seems that there is this: we will sacrifice, and I think a lot of European leaders see this, that we will sacrifice Ukraine in the pursuit of weakening Russia. And I think that's how a lot of people saw this war, that we're happy to sacrifice Ukraine to weaken our greatest threat on our border. And personally, I hate that level of thinking. I think it's sadistic for a lot, that we're willing to sacrifice you because we want to live in peace over here in our very
It's the same with the US and Taiwan.
Oh, yes, and Taiwan should be very, very concerned.
Exactly.
Well.
And this is why I'm saying that the US's strategy in the Asia-Pacific region. Look, there was one video about this that was very interesting. The guy said, what if the Chinese, for example, I know I'm drifting away from Ukraine, but we're coming back. What if the Chinese just blockade Taiwan? Taiwan has maybe 3 months of supplies. What if the Chinese board every ship going towards Taiwan and stop them? What is the US Navy going to do? Are they going to engage Chinese vessels and start the war? Or Taiwan might capitulate. Literally, it makes a clock, and then the Chinese are the master of the clock, This is the nightmare scenario for the US, because instead of a real war, you cut them off and you force the Americans to make a decision. And the same thing, is a war worth it for Taiwan? They're like a sacrificial lamb in the grand scheme of things. For the US, they're like, oh, perfect, it's our opportunity to weaken China. It's the same talking points, but we've seen it now. Is it going to work again? So we could literally, if you want, later on, we can make a video about all the mistakes Ukraine have done, because there's so many. And I'm preparing videos to talk about these mistakes that Ukraine have done, because I feel that they're still into this propaganda of, oh yeah, we're eliminating 1,000 Russian soldiers per day. And it's ridiculous. When you see the Ukrainian graphs of Russian losses, it's a straight line going up. Whoever believes this is actually, anyway, mentally challenged.
Retarded, yeah. If you believe warfare, if you believe that warfare is linear, it's a very, very stupid error to make. And you saw propaganda posters as far back as World War I about, oh, this is going to take 50 years to get here, and all this. And war is not linear.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
peaks and troughs, and things can move incredibly slow for months, and then you'll see a massive wave push through. And same with casualties and all of this.
Exactly. So when you look at Mediazona, despite its faults, despite its mistakes, you still see peaks. You see, huge peaks, and then lower depending on military operations, which makes sense. There's times where there are higher casualties, there are times where there's lower casualties. But the Ukraine propaganda is so strong that, actually, no jokes, some people in Ukraine are not going into the military because they think they're not needed at the front, because the Russians are about to lose tomorrow. So, for example, I remember during the summer counteroffensive, they said the Russians were losing more men, even though they're on the defensive and with massive firepower.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but you guys have less firepower. You guys are out in the open. How come the Russians are losing more men? Because they're idiots. They're orcs. Okay, we saw the end result. But yet they repeat all the time the same narrative. Every video we see is just a little fraction of the battlefield. One Russian column that got eliminated, and they're like, look, the orcs are retarded. I'm like, yeah, this is the one column that got hit. You don't know how many other columns were moving towards Ukraine positions. Maybe there were 10 columns, and that's the unlucky one that got annihilated. It's like with drone strikes. we see only the drone strikes that were successful, but we never see the ones that are not successful. We don't know the real effect of these drones. We don't know the hit rate. Is it 100% or is it more like 10%? But they're not, nobody's going to show all the drones just falling, jammed, or crashed into the woods, caught in a tree. I've flown drones, okay? I've practiced with drones in the past months. It's not easy to control, okay? And sometimes you have it stuck in the trees. It's not easy.
That's very true.
So especially the FPV drones are easier, but it's not that easy. The problem of the FPV drones is that you don't see anything. You only see the perspective of the drone, but you have to be guided by another drone. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So if your recon drone is jammed, all these FPV drones don't work.
Yeah.
So maybe that column, that Russian column that got hit was just unlucky. They didn't see that recon drone. They couldn't destroy it. And then you have waves of drone coming towards them. And this is what I hate about the war analysts on the Ukrainian side, is that they're nitpicking. They're really looking at small events and they extrapolate out of this. Russian column that gets destroyed, the Russian army's attack tactics are bad. Oh, okay. Is that so? So why is the line continuously moving towards Kyiv? Oh, the Russians are so bad, but yet they keep advancing. No, this is what triggers me all the time. I'm like, no, we have to debunk this. And just because we talk about such things, we get attacked. Like, we are the target instead of the Ukrainian commanders doing nonsense on the battlefield. We've seen the stories of Ukraine commanders saying, yeah, the lifespan of mobilized personnel is 1 week because we sent them to get butchered, essentially. And then they're wondering why nobody wants to be mobilized, why people are resisting being taken into the army, as if people don't understand that your chances of living is 2 weeks. You're not even given training. They're like, okay, here's how to load a weapon, and okay, you're gonna attack now, or you're gonna hold this position. It's frustrating because still, what? How many years has it been? How many years, right? Yeah. And they're still doing silly things like that. And for Ukraine, it's, how can I say, for Ukraine, it's more critical because they have less resources, like you said. In a war of attrition, the smaller country has to be much smarter in how it's used, in how they use their resources. They cannot play the game of the war of attrition the same way the enemy does. It's not going to work.
And I guess you need to take into account too, this is the reason why, we're more critical here, is Russia always has an ejection button. Their ejection button is like an ejection seat button. They can always hit the eject as far as if the existence of the state starts being at threat, we can always withdraw. Now, I'm not saying therefore, Putin would be strung up, but they can always withdraw back to an area, hold that line, or even back to the border, and they can end the war instantly. Where Ukraine, it is absolutely critical that they make the best decisions possible, because they have to continue fighting to have an end to the war. There is no, look, we give up this amount of land and it ends, because there's going to be maximalist goal after goal after goal. That it is absolutely critical that Ukraine is in a fight for the existence of the state. Where Putin, the war, I believe, has become existential for Putin and his upper echelon, but not for the Russian Federation as a whole. It may look very different if there was a loss to the war, but at the absolute worst is, they lose 250,000 men. Putin is somehow taken out, whatever, and new leader comes in and goes, hey, we pull back to the recognized border, and the war then ends, where Ukraine doesn't have even an extreme option like that. They need to be as effective and as efficient as possible on the front line to see to their military actions and goals. So it's far more critical.
Absolutely. Although for Russia now, the war is also they cannot stop now either, because they have annexed all these territories. They have they have added them to the Russian Federation officially. It would be a huge blow to the, like you said, to the hierarchy. But just like when the Russians left Afghanistan, right after happened Chechnya.
Yes.
Because there's a power vacuum. And this is a recurrent theme in Russian history. Whenever the Tsar, whether he's red or whatever ideology, whenever the Tsar loses a war, it opens the window to a bunch of rebellions. When the Tsar Nicholas II lost the war in against Japan, well, there were rebellions right after, and his power started shaking. So this is a recurrent theme in Russian history. Whenever the leader loses, the power shakes, because Russia is a federation. It's not one united people. There's a lot of different ethnic groups on the boundaries. So and they can only be ruled with an iron fist.
Yeah.
You need a strong power at the center. It's not like the US, which has an entire different system. Russia has its own system, and they cannot lose a war. Look, the United States, after withdrawing from Vietnam, 0 consequences. So even now, like, okay, they retreated from Iraq, Afghanistan. Consequences were minimal in the political hierarchy. But for Russia, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
People see war differently in these two countries. The sacrifice is different. So for Russians now, the war is, even for some Russians, and that's the thing, for some Russians, even the existence of Ukraine is a threat. And this is the problem. And you get into a deadlock situation where Ukrainians believe the existence of Russia is a threat, and for Russians, the existence of Ukraine is a threat. What do you do then? This is why all these talks of peace talks, and we're just going to stop the ceasefire line here. Okay, tomorrow the line has already moved. It's so dumb. Okay, in 1 week, when you get back to the table, another city, a village is going to be under Russian control. They're going to keep shifting that ceasefire line. Doesn't make sense.
We've spoken a lot about the wavering support from Ukraine's Western partners.
Yeah.
And I've been speaking and raising concern for some time that I think this could be the time where we potentially see a large false flag event to try and draw back in that support. And it does make sense if you were to look at the reasons behind when and why you have false flag events. A lot of boxes are being ticked. Do you think that is something that we could see?
At this point, I don't think so. Because the window of opportunity of such an event would have been in the early months up until now. But I don't know. Because with wavering support, if people are already wavering support now with everything that happened, they might even see Ukraine as a threat. You see? So maybe some people are thinking about it, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know. It seems unlikely to me, let's say.
There's also a lot of analysts, and it was at one point this like wild out there theory. And now it's seeming to be actually creeping to more and more mainstream. It's funny how there's theories around this war that at one point were completely extremist ideas that you'd be strung up, and that they move into the mainstream and even cross then that barrier of what is pro-Russian to pro-Ukraine or vice versa. That is incredibly funny to see. And one of these main ones that I see getting floated more and more is a movement of a border of a NATO country rather than adding areas into NATO. And now I'm not saying I support this or believe it is realistic, but we've spoken about this whole idea that as long as then there's existence here of Russia or Ukraine, they see each other as a threat, and that if NATO is on the table, Russia is saying that we will continue fighting as long as that's on the table, and Ukraine basically saying if that's not on the table, we need to continue fighting because we don't have any support. That a lot of people are saying, could there be a movement of a border, say Poland up to the Dnipro, and that it becomes an autonomous republic of Ukraine in that sector, and instead of then having a country join NATO, it's sort of NATO has joined you in a way. I don't know if you've seen this, but what I'm more getting at with this is, do you have any, and I'm not going to hold you to this, but do you have any predictions of where you believe that this war, where we'll eventually see guns fall silent?
It's very hard. It's very hard because we've seen so many developments in this war. It's very hard. I think for Russia, the real question is what happens when Russia reaches this border that they have annexed. This is the real question, what they do then. Because look, the big question, for me is what are they going to do once they reach this line? So Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and all these, the line that they still haven't taken yet. But at the same time, I'm already seeing how the Russians are pushing into different oblasts. Now they're pushing massively into Kharkiv Oblast. They're very close to reaching the border with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. They're only a couple kilometers away. Are they going to give it up? Maybe, maybe not. So yeah, it's very hard. Honestly, I don't know, because I think the problem is if we're focused on looking at the end of the war, in my opinion, I'm just going to say, for me, by analyzing always when the war is going to end, I fear it's going to blur my analysis of the war taking place right now. The videos I make is always about looking at casualty reports, what's happening on the map, and based on that, try to see what's happening. And okay, maybe before I said the Russians moved a lot, and in the winter they moved much more slower, but because they concentrated in Kursk Oblast, you see. But now that the Battle of Kursk is over, a lot of these troops are going to be refitted, refilled with personnel, and they're going to appear somewhere else on the battlefield. Same thing for Ukraine. But Russians have more troops to spread out. So, yeah, maybe there's some times where the front slows down, but the movement is the same. They're always pushing in the same directions. Now it's the South Donetsk Oblast that is the main objective. And we see that for the Russians, it's to reach that border. And after that, maybe it's going to be the Zaporozhye border. So we see what the Russians might want. Where they're going to stop is the question. Nobody knows. I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know, because they have every incentive to continue. Why not? At the same time, I also think the Russians feel bad because it causes the death of a brother people, and it hurts even more. It's yeah, they're different, but they're not that different. And for the Russians, it hurts. They don't like doing this. It's like, I don't know, the relationship between your countries, but as if Australia and New Zealand were fighting. When there's all these tensions with China. Imagine there's tensions with China, and now Australia and New Zealand are fighting. It feels like a brother war in some sense. Or like, it hurts the Russians to do this. They see Ukraine as little Russia. But yeah, it's very interesting what's going to happen. All I know is that the big thing, I don't know when the war is going to end, where the border is going to end. All I know is that Ukrainians now are more patriotic and more anti-Russian than before. And this is, I've seen all across the board, even the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. A lot of Ukrainians are now anti-speaking Russian. They prefer speaking Ukrainian. Their identity, perhaps as a people, was born because of this war. We can say maybe the birth of the Ukrainian people, in the modern sense, will stem from this war, because before 2022, there were Russians and Ukrainians had close ties, even though they were fighting small proxy wars. They were still close. A lot of families are mixed between Russia and Ukraine, but now that there's a clear split. And I've seen vloggers go to Ukraine and look, everyone said, I don't like the sound of Russian. I don't want to hear Russian anymore. Just the thought of Russians, I can't. And the fact that people like Azov are taking over the fight, so whatever Ukraine has will be their own nation. And it's going to be very different from whatever relationship Russia had with Ukraine in the past. So it's maybe going to be a nation that is closer to Europe, maybe. It's hard to say. It's at the same time, Russia doesn't have infinite resources either, right? They also, I don't know. You know what? The big thing, personally speaking, I don't like talking about things that I don't know. And I'm not going to say, yeah, this is going to happen because I want this to happen. I don't know how many resources the Russians have left. I just find it funny as an analyst that people say, yeah, Russia's run out of vehicles because they're not using them anymore. Okay, is there maybe something else to your analysis? Is there maybe another reason? Nope. All the vehicles are destroyed. Look, Oryx. Just look at Oryx. Okay, bro, on Oryx, there's literally a pile of burnt metal. I don't even know what that is. And it counts as a Russian loss. At the beginning of the war, any tank painted a Z, oh, Russian. So we don't know the true extent of Russian losses. We don't know what they're preparing. Oh, Russian production is very low. How do you know Russian production? Is there an Excel sheet that they're publishing with their actual production? I don't understand. Like, oh, this is what the Russians have said. Okay, so when the Russians say something that falls into your narrative, you take it. But when they say something that you don't like, you don't take it. So they discriminate. They're like, that I take, that I don't take. See? So this is what's bothering me. Same thing with some people on the very pro-Russian side, and they're like, yeah, the Russians are fighting NATO in Kursk. Look at 2,000 Polish guys have been killed in Kursk. There's been Colombians, hundreds. That's a recurrent theme on the Russian side, that they're fighting against NATO troops. There's no proof of it either. North Koreans. Oh, yeah, 10,000 North Koreans. Sorry, what? We've seen maybe 100 at most. 100 at most.
Ghost of Pyongyang.
The ghost of Pyongyang. This is great. Can I get the copyright of this? This is great.
Please do. Someone commented on my Telegram a while back when it first came, and I've been using it ever since.
This is excellent. But so, look, we are doing our best with being analysts, like day to day. We don't know what's happening behind the door. Like behind closed doors, we don't know what's happening. All I know is that whatever peace agreement Trump is trying to build right now in Ukraine can only fail. This is the only thing I'm certain of. Whatever Trump is working on right now with Ukraine is going to fail, because there's no incentive for either country to stop. Ukraine wants guarantees from the United States, and the United States are not ready to give these security guarantees. And Russia cannot stop with the front line now.
Yeah.
And the United States cannot hand over Ukrainian territory to the Russians either to stop the war.
Yeah.
So it's a deadlock.
But nor can the US make, I shouldn't say they can, I guess, but nor can the US then say, well, fuck yeah, you're not getting any of our ISR or anything, and it's going to be a fucking massacre on the front line.
Okay, yeah, well.
This is the gridlock of, and that's what is being faced. And this is what I think Putin is hoping for, is that Trump's patience goes to the point where he goes, well, if you look at what he will do is go, look, what Russia is requesting is this line in the sand of the 4 oblasts. They occupy 65%, so they are closer to fully doing that than you are the other way. If you're not going to sign this, you're getting nothing. His patience going, well, fuck yeah. And in my opinion, and I know I may have different opinions on this, but if the US were to pull full support, it would be a fucking massacre, for the reasons of one, not getting that, but also the morale impact on the dudes at the front line too. And I just don't know if the US is prepared to do that.
Okay, now what if, okay, what if the United States pulls out and the front stays stable? What message is it going to show?
Look, and the message would be that Ukraine's domestic capability in Europe is far better than we thought. But
it's going to show the US as a bunch of clowns. This is going to show.
Yeah, my argument is, though, the front line isn't stable with America in the picture. Like the front line isn't stable now with the US currently here, or in the front line wasn't stable in 24 with the very pro-Ukraine Biden administration in. That what I'm saying is, okay, the US support may end and the front line stabilize, but I'd say is if Trump goes no more aid, hammer down, that's it, and the front line stabilizes, it's more because Russia doesn't have then the assets to continue the line than the US assets leaving, because well, all we would be looking at now is you're plucking out those US assets and everything else remains the same, that you should see an increase in the line. If not, great scenario, and then the US should re-enter as a mediator and say, hey, look, you actually don't have the power to continue moving forward. But I think the most likely, and this is the Occam's razor of, what is the most likely is probably going to happen. You see hoof prints, you think horse, not zebra, is the front line hasn't been stable for 18 months with full US soft asset, which I think people underestimate soft asset. If they then pluck that out, it's probably most likely going to get significantly worse. And if that then occurs, how people will see the US is not just as a non-working partner, they'll see it as an enemy. So that is I just don't know if I wonder if Trump is cooking up something somewhere that might be some level of it. And I remember thinking this right in the very, very beginning. I don't even know if I voiced this anywhere, but is there some option in the wildest dreams where America approaches Moscow and Kyiv and goes, look, we can extend NATO all the way to Vladivostok. Russia, you can take Crimea and Donetsk. There's going to have to be some sort of land concession, but all of you is in one massive NATO alliance, as per Putin floated in, I believe, 2004. I just don't know what America is prepared to do.
It is an interesting question. The problem is we already tried things like that, and look, Greece and Turkey didn't stop them from fighting. Okay, they both entered NATO. Okay, Turkey invaded Cyprus, Greece entered the war. Tomorrow, 100% there's going to be a war between Greece and Turkey at one point. So nowadays, the problem is the more you extend NATO, the more you include countries that have widely different goals. And once again, that's a problem. Look, NATO at first was Western Europe. And when they started going east, it naturally increased the threat towards Russia because the countries they included had a negative view of Russia. So you're going to have the more you extend NATO, the more you're going to have the perspective of these countries. Okay, NATO at this point could also include China, and there's no problem. NATO, the entire planet should be under NATO control. I mean,
Ursula von der Leyen at the helm.
And the same problem goes with the European Union. The European Union worked well when there were less countries. Now there's so many countries with so many diverging opinions where every country has the same vote. So Luxembourg has the same vote as Germany. It cannot work. And now they say, oh, maybe we're going to expand it once again. And for what? It's just going to increase the problems. So sometimes increase in size is going to be problematic.
Oh, absolutely. There's a huge problem in defense forces, in the Western Armed Forces, and I'm going to absolutely butcher numbers here, but say when we were a large force in World War II, that we had, say, 15 colonels, where now we're a much smaller force with 200 colonels. And there's this whole idea of way too top heavy. There's there's too many chiefs. And there's a lot of these issues. Yeah.
Absolutely. Honestly, there's so many things we could talk. I think we're not going to fit it in this time. I think this means I have to invite you on my channel. I think this is the conclusion of this. I have to invite you on my channel. Ask the people if they like. I'm gonna ask it. Let me know in the comment section if you want Matt, WillyOAM to be invited on my channel.
Oh, well, look, I'm happy to give a perspective, I guess. I guess where I see myself most useful, because you and I have a lot of overlap, is maybe on effect I would see on just the frontline elements with the betrayal of US, like how the soldier, I believe, would be feeling. Because I think that is the element that people don't take into account, is these dudes, these Russians, these Ukrainian soldiers, there's this idea that these soldiers at the front line are uninformed, dumb, orcs, or what's the term, crops, or whatever they use. Like, and I'm like, no, these guys have the beauty of social media is they can look at Telegram and YouTube and all and be as informed as basically anyone else, but not far off as informed as the president of the country. These guys are clever, smart guys who know what's going on, and that's a problem because now our state propaganda is not as effective. State propaganda, like say Ukrainian propaganda, which has been incredibly effective, has been far more effective into Western NATO audiences than it actually has been onto soldiers at the front line. Because a lot of them, they're writing to me daily going, well, that's bullshit. I'm getting fucking shot at, man.
Yeah.
And that is one of the problems, is I believe if you start seeing, like, say, the US withdraw, and vice versa, though, as well,
For sure.
saw massive uptick, the Russians on the other side are going to go, oh, shit, what the fuck's going on? So, yeah, if there's anything you need help with, and Turkey, man, like when I was in Afghanistan, I wasn't on a base, I was on a camp. I believe it was 70 meters by 30 or 40 meters. We had an element of Turkish troops there. We were told not to interact with them at all because of certain flows of money, that they would never get attacked, and that they could go out the front gates and go get tea in the nearing neighborhoods, where we're rolling out the front gate with fucking guns and body armor and all this shit. And it was like, hey, be very, very careful around this. And even down to, and I've created an international incident here. There was rumor, at least, that if we were in a base overrun, because we had, of course, drills on actions on like a breach of the wall and overrun. If you get overrun, you fight to the death. There was rumor that their drills were, no, stand out the front of your door with no weapon system and your hands up, and you'll be all right. And you just see all of these like completely diverging elements within one sort of NATO group. You go, how's it going to work? Look at Syria, where you've got these completely, it's like a NATO umbrella with it's not NATO when we're doing this, but we're targeting this, and we think this area is a terrorist organization, and you're like, hang on, this is a fucking mess.
Yeah, well, there's many topics we could talk, just like how Western countries are being so diverse and what effect it can have on defense, because people have different affinities with different enemies. So just like your little example in that base, imagine that base was a country, and you had people in your country that are like, oh, well, these guys are not really enemies, just but that's another topic.
Australia has large concern with things like that occurring. And now that we've lost, as you and I spoke about an hour ago, about those, farm boy, rural guys fighting conscript, we've lost that realistically. Of you cannot just look at a data sheet. You can't look at an Excel spreadsheet and go, yep, 18, 50, these are our fighting age male. You cannot, you cannot do that. And there's also different countries, as far as progressive to conservative and everything in between, that I think about, like in a couple of decades' time, of where Ukraine is going to sit. Ukraine is a very conservative country, very religious country, wanting to join a very progressive alliance. And that progressive alliance is going to go, look, you've just lost X amount of people through emigration, as well as deaths on the battlefield and those who are wounded. Look, we want to migrate in all these people from wherever. And I think there's going to be a large resistance to, hang on, did we fight for this? This is not what we didn't want hang on, what the fuck's going on? I think there's going to be a lot of friction down the line with that. Ukraine is not a great like starting base for like large third world like immigration into, just from stability, ideology, all of that. And I guarantee the EU is going, well, not a single country in the EU has a positive birth rate. We have to do something. What are we going to do? Because we can't have Ukraine below 10 million people in the next century.
You know, and that's going to be the concluding thought for me. But, you know, there's this Ukrainian politician, the former advisor of President Zelensky, Arestovich. And he said in a scenario, he said, what if, okay, Ukraine one day stops the war with Russia, and just like what the Soviets did with Germany after World War II, they turn like the Soviets turned part of the Germans against the other Germans. What if the Russians managed to turn the Ukrainians and say, look, you should have stuck with us. You were betrayed by the West that you loved so much. You were betrayed by the Americans that promised to protect you. We're going to protect you. We're going to be the guarantor, I don't know how you say it, of your independence. And then they throw the Ukrainians against Eastern Europe. This is what he said. He said, if the Ukrainians, they have the best army in Europe right now, in West, like in the Eurosphere. I'm not including Russia, okay? But you know what I mean. They have the, but I have to disclaimer. But what if they just go west from there, the Ukrainians? Who's going to stop them?
Yeah, well, there's even been a big bit. I read this whole write-up by someone behind the scenes on my side who was talking about the ability for SVR operations to radicalize elements to prevent any joining of NATO or EU, even once the guns fall silent. So you've got these radicalized groups who they know, as long as these groups exist, regardless of who they're fighting, you won't be able to join whatever alliance. So as long as this exists, you're not going to be in it. And this idea of, well, even if they're shooting back at this border or where they're here or there or whatever, whether it's west or east or north or south, that after the war there may be a radicalization campaign or further radicalization by like groups like the SVR, just to create dissent, just to create chaos, and that will work in the favor of extending things and things being off the table. And that is what intelligence organizations, especially like one like that, does. And that's interesting, you know, hybrid style warfare to look into, and just destabilizing efforts.
Absolutely. No, it's all I can say once again for the 10th time. It's going to be interesting, but I don't think I think we still have some work to do this year. I think there's still work to do from our channels. I think
working at McDonald's, bro. I put a meme up the other day of like, this is me. I'll be flipping burgers, bro. I actually look forward to the day that I can delete Signal, WhatsApp, Telegram, and be out of the public sector. I fantasize about that daily. I tell the lady down at my local coffee shop, I tell you there's going to be a day I hand in a resume here, and you better bloody hire me, because I just want to hang out and get the local gossip that no one in the tens of thousands of people hate me and whatever. But
that's right. That's right.
Look, and you and I will be here to try and do our very best to cut through cut through the BS and provide, I guess, perspective on things and a bit of a why is this, you know. And I really appreciate your incredible effort into what you do, because people who don't produce videos don't understand the amount of work that goes behind something like that. Especially, I think I have a benefit in doing daily content because I see daily move, and I'm reporting on this small sector, where you are then analyzing a situation from, say, two weeks prior, and what is all of this information that you have, and how do I actually make this into something, firstly, literate, and then that is entertaining to watch. So I think you do a brilliant job of that, man, and it's a real it's a fantastic thing that many people look back on, especially in time, because there's going to be a time in a few years or a decade where people go, well, a lot of what we were told was completely bullshit.
Yeah.
And maybe this bloke who I thought was a prick actually was correct in this analysis, and that is That is at least trying to be fair. So
Yeah.
and
Appreciate it.
anything I can help with, man, please let me know. I don't know if I've taken up 2 hours of your, I don't even know
No,
what
it's
that
true. It's late for
is.
you now. It's like the day started for me.
Oh, it's 10 past midnight, so the day has officially started.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Let's do this because everybody, for those that are still listening after 2 hours, hats off to you. But yeah, I've been caught up with a lot of work, so I couldn't come up on Willie's show. And with the time difference, it's hard, you know, because for you it has to be very late for you, very early for me. That's the only way it works. But no, I'm happy that I finally managed to be on your show, and you're doing a great job. So I think we should do this more often. You know, either I come on your show, you come on my channel, and we do this more often. I think it should be done.
Oh, mate, and I think it's, creating a space where you can actually discuss different ideas is incredibly important, because if you ask me what are the biggest things the biggest concern that I have, biggest threat facing the Western world is a lack of critical thinking. Like that is, like, it's not China or Russia, it's not nuclear weapons, it's a lack of being able to critically think and add objective and subjective realities to things. Not that both aren't important, but I think it is a huge problem. And I think, obviously, you and I had an audience just being like, hey, look, this is what we think, trying to take maybe emotion out.
Yeah, well, you see, this is, I think the problem is that in the West, too many people are going to university to study social science and not the hard sciences. So that means that I followed my dad forced me to go into the hard sciences. And he was right, because that made me into a person that has observation skills. You have an experiment, you have to observe the results, and from these results you have to do an analysis. And this is critical thinking. Oh, maybe I'm wrong. And you even have to say, maybe I messed up the experiment, maybe I messed up this, maybe what I'm seeing is not what I'm actually seeing. So you could be observing something, but the results say something else. So this is critical thinking, to think that maybe you're wrong. Oh, and that if you say something, it has to be backed by data. But the fact that so many people are going to social sciences, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that we don't need tons of people going to social sciences where everything is a construct and you don't need to prove a point. You just say it and you feel whatever it is the truth.
It's postmodernism. It is that all truth is relative, and not all truth is relative. 2 + 2 is 4, and XY XX is this. At a very base level. I know low-hanging fruit there, but this postmodernist thinking of I feel, therefore this is, and what I try and cut through is you may feel Ukraine is right, therefore will win. I say that is not analysis. That's not analysis. That is activism. And activism and analysis has got blurred the line. Now, people know me that depending what people call me online, but I've spent several months in Ukraine, and I do want to see Ukraine succeed. And I want to see the best survival and thrive of the nation possible. But in analysis, I have to go, but what is it? Because and this is what I believe Europe is absolutely stuck in the loop of, and all most European leaders believe that being quite right, that relatively then will mean that they'll be successful. And just because they say Ukraine is on the right side of history, therefore they will win. And what I say is, no, Putin believes he is just as on the right side of history. Therefore, if you believe being right will lead you to victory, maybe think about delivering some tanks rather than another message, because the extremists in the Middle East believe they're way more right than I do. Believe I'm right, and I'm not willing to go and blow myself up for just my own ideology. So obviously they believe they are more right than I believe that I'm right. And well, it doesn't mean that it is objectively the correct idea. And that's exported in what I refer to as woke imperialism. But that's a topic for another day.
A topic for another day.
Look, I've taken to it a bit out of your time. I hope that you have a fantastic day.
Same.
People know where to find you. You're not inconspicuous. People find you. Look, mate, thanks again. I'm going to go get some sleep. And if you need anything from me, please just reach out.
Perfect.
Easy. Thank you, bro.
Thank you.